and welcome to Felixstowe Matters, live from our studio here in Felixstowe. My name is Sue Hall. Heavy breathing in the studio this morning is going to be carried out by my dog Presto, and my guest this morning for us to talk to is Adrian Baldry. Good morning, Adrian.
Morning, Sue.
Now, you have a very special skill that you have. You operate a driving school, don't you?
That's right, yes.
Teaching people to drive, but you've also got another company that does some specialist training. Tell us about that.
Yeah, proprietary driver training is basically aimed at the workplace driver, within car, vans, even up to lorries, giving them extra training. Obviously, passing the driving test means that you no longer need supervision. It doesn't actually mean that you can actually perhaps drive 30, 40,000 miles a year and be able to cope with that.
Yes, because it's quite scary, isn't it? Some of these youngsters who are just passing their test and have had somebody in the car with them all that time, and then suddenly they're let loose on motorways and areas that they couldn't drive in. But you do a lot of work with companies, don't you? Is there some sort of compliance that they have to adhere to?
Yeah, well, health and safety law says any workplace activity that places your employee in danger should carry out risk assessment and training as necessary. Also, any workplace activity that puts members of the public at risk also needs an assessment. Obviously, when you're driving, you're putting members of the public at risk, so it should be looked at.
And it's compulsory, is it?
Well, it's been in law since about 1974. What's really pushed it along is in 2008, along came the Corporate Manslaughter Act.
Right.
So any serious breach of health and safety law, health and safety or the police could bring the Corporate Manslaughter Act into use. £500,000 fine.
Ooh.
I'm a little bit cheaper than that. Just a little bit.
Yeah.
And also, in 2010 it was rejigged. It can now comes with a publicity order, so the judge, as well as fining you £500,000, can say you need to put it on your website.
Right. So you've got to be publicly
You've got to publicly
acknowledge
declare that you've been convicted of corporate manslaughter.
Wow, that is a big change.
So
isn't
imagine
it?
your nice shiny website
Yes.
with, oh, by the way, we was convicted of corporate manslaughter as well.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure there's not a lot of companies that know that that's law.
No, there's only been 2 cases so far, none of which yet for driving, but at the Association of Fleet Operators a couple of months ago, one of the guest speakers was a policeman who actually said to the members there that UK police forces are actively looking for their first corporate manslaughter regard to driving. Up till sort of recently, they've just looked at the driver. You know, was he at fault for the collision? Now they're looking further back. Was he given training before he was given a set of car keys? Has he had 2 or 3 collisions in the past? If he has, did the company offer him any training to correct any faults that he's got?
Oh, that's really interesting.
If they didn't,
Yeah.
then they could say, well, has the employer complied with their duty of care? If you gave the employer a chainsaw, would you make sure you could use it?
It's like any other health and safety compliance, isn't it? You know, it's you've got to offer the training for that piece of equipment, and a car is a piece of equipment.
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of people think, oh, he's got a set of, look at his license, oh, he's got a license, here's a set of keys, away you go. Because that's what they've always done.
So this change in the law was obviously good news for a company like yours, because it meant a lot more companies were aware of their responsibilities and they'd be looking for it. You mentioned the police there. Do they have their own people that do their driver training? Or?
Oh, yes.
Yes?
Oh, yes. To get to a Class 1 driver, you're probably looking at something like 9 weeks of training.
Right.
Over so many years before you become the highest grade you can.
Because they certainly are a risk on the street sometimes with their blue lights flashing and everything, so
they
have
a lot of training.
Yes, I can imagine. So not just the health and safety compliance, but I think there's all sorts of other advantages to the training that you do. It's like fuel economy, bad habits, that sort of thing.
We usually find the techniques we pass on usually pays for our training. You know, we usually up their efficiency by 20-30%. A lot of drivers I take out with quite easily increase their miles per gallon 6, 8 and sometimes 10 from the before and after. Just by taking active gear changes, planning ahead so you avoid stopping where you don't need to, just keeping the car rolling, little things like that, little tweaks. It's just all add up together. Not makes you safer, but more efficient. And obviously, you know, 20% in fuel costs these days over perhaps 10 drivers can be £20,000.
Yeah, so the larger companies would really notice the difference in their...
A couple of years ago I did a session, nearly 2 months it was, with one of the NHS trusts up in Norfolk. Halfway through they came back to us and said, oh, we're looking at your before and after figures. you should save us 90,000 a year.
My goodness, 90,000.
I thought, I'm not charging enough here. And they said so many tonnes of CO2, but my jaw was already on the floor by that time, so I didn't.
Well, I suppose that's the other side of it, isn't it? The sort of driving more efficiently makes you a little bit more eco-friendly as well, doesn't it?
That's it, yeah. You're not burning the fuel.
So there's huge advantages to it. So how long does that training take?
Well, just a little bit of eco-training. We sometimes see 8 people a day, so it's 15 minutes each, just a few little different tricks. If we want to go more advanced, driver development, defensive driving, what have you, different names for the same thing. We usually have like a 3.5 hour session.
Right.
We can take them out, we look at their driving, and then see how we can develop it. It's not a driving test. We look, okay, you're driving at this standard, we can now do this, this and this, and increase that standard of driving, more professional. So
the driving test itself has changed since I took my driving test, for example, and I've never taken any additional training, so I probably couldn't recognise a lot of stuff in the highway code without some refresher stuff. But it's changed with this theory test now, isn't it? How do you think has that improved drivers, do you think, in your opinion, or not?
I don't think it's done much. It makes them more aware of some of the rules and regs with MOT certificates, insurance. People are more aware. There's not the excuse now, I didn't know. It's all in the theory test, so if a car hasn't got an MOT, they know about it. They would have learned it when they're doing the theory, so there's not that excuse there.
So the people that book in through your driving school obviously get the added benefit of your knowledge as the priority driver trainer.
Yeah, we're trying a little bit. Obviously, sometimes when somebody's very novice, there's only so much you can teach them to start with. We don't teach just to pass the test, we try and develop their knowledge as much as possible.
Right.
But when somebody's only got perhaps 15, 20 hours experience, you can't give them too many scenarios. They like it, in this situation, do this, this and this. Once they've got 2 or 3 years experience, you can then start to think, well, in this situation, would you consider doing this? And they've got more experience to think, yeah, this might be better in this situation. Whereas your learner, it's too much too soon.
Yeah, I can understand that. So if I was not a company, if I was just an individual and I decided I wanted to take this awareness training, I mean, what would that involve for me in terms of cost and time?
It could be perhaps £60 for a couple of hours, or perhaps a bit more. Depends how in depth, how much time you want to spend on it. And obviously we can train you up, so you could later on perhaps take the ROSPA or IAM test. We can train you up, and you can do that, and that's the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, isn't it? Yeah. Right, and you get a certificate to prove to it. And the thing about ROSPA is, you get ungraded if you're not that good, but you can get bronze, silver, or gold. Okay. So if you got bronze the first time, 3 years later you get invited to take it again. You might do silver, gold the next time. I'd much rather have that on my website than corporate manslaughter, actually. Oh, yeah. I've seen companies like builders who said, all their drivers have done courses and some only have got the ROSPA Gold. So what kind of comments and feedback do you get from the people who take your courses? Well, a lot of people have never done any training. They might have passed a test 35, 40 years ago, and they said, oh, that's really good, we should get this every 3 years. You teach them stuff they don't know. Good example, how local authorities sign the roads. You came around some bends today, didn't you? Yeah. So some bends just have perhaps one warning sign. Some corners have 2 or 3 signs slow written on the road. Why have some corners got more signage than others? Yes, that's a whole other subject, isn't it? Road marking. Yeah. Basically, council's worth on how many people have been killed or injured. The more fatalities, more injuries, the more signs they put up. Right. And some of those can be conflicting sometimes. But you can use that. Think, why is this sign? Why is there so many signs here? And then perhaps it can adjust your speed and position as you approach it. So what sort of training did you yourself have to do to be able to pass this on? Initially I was a driving instructor, did all the qualification for that, and then I did another set of qualifications for becoming on the register of fleet driver trainers. League, did you say? Fleet driver trainers. Fleet driver trainers, I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's more aimed at people who can already drive. Qualified me to do development training. Right. Cars and vans. So you can do cars, vans, lorries? Lorries, before I was a driving instructor I had 12 years on lorries, so I've got that background as well. Okay, and what about buses? Not to tend to do buses, no. No, you don't. But I think I can pass people on to do that as well. Right, because there are people who do the fleet training for buses, I guess. Yeah. What we've got, drivers have to do what they call driver CPC, continual personal competency. So a lot of courses now do involve driving. It's a new thing that's come out recently in law. All lorries, bus drivers all have to do this. They've got to do their 37 hours in the classroom before 2014. So
Wow.
standards are trying to be raised. Not just UK, it's European wide.
So do you work with other sort of health and safety people, you know, because there's this, it's such a minefield, isn't it? There's first aid, there's all sorts of different things. So, you know, if a company's wanting to be compliant, then, you know, there must be a lot of different providers that they have to work with, because no one company will provide everything.
Yeah, you find a lot of health and safety advisors don't really touch driving. It's a specialised field, and they tend not to go down that route. But we can do that. And obviously, once we do training, we fill out a full report for the employer. Because if you've got more than 5 employees, you need to keep records.
Right.
I don't know why you wouldn't want to keep records if you've got less than 5, because it's all there if you need it.
So if I was a small company with 5 drivers, and I said to you, right, I want to be compliant, I want to make sure my drivers are trained, would you take them out individually? Would you do them as a group? I mean, how? Because that's obviously my business still needs to run with those 5
That's
drivers.
It. Yeah, well, we can work with the company. Obviously, you might not want 2 drivers, 2 employees, not earning any money that particular day. So yeah, we can take them half day each. So you're not taking too many people away from the workplace, as it were.
Right.
You know, some people are like, yeah, we've got time, we take 2 people out. And sometimes it's nice to have 2 people in the car, because you get a bit of discussion going with the person who's not driving in the back.
So for the larger companies, you know, that presumably it's easier for them to let more people go at a time. No?
It's up to them, you know. Yeah.
But if they've got, say, I don't know, 100 company car drivers, for example, you know, that's a lot of people to get trained up. So that would have to be like a little campaign.
Yeah, campaign. Also, you look at who's the higher risk ones. Look at their collision history.
Right.
If somebody's had a half dozen knocks over the last 3 years, well,
prioritise them.
Prioritise those. You might have a new employee, so again, before you give them a set of car keys, we can take them out. Have a look at that. Take them out before they actually go out.
So what kind of companies do you find yourself working with now then?
All sorts, you know, insurance companies.
And how do they get to hear about you?
Mainly we campaign. A lot of companies, I was with a lorry driver yesterday, and it's flagged up from the insurance company.
Oh, right.
He'd had an accident, so we go in and have a look at what he's up to. A lot of it is manoeuvring.
And these, I've probably got terrible bad habits, because I think you do, don't you? It's just, and you don't even realise you've got them, because you just get into them, you know, as soon as you start to drive on your own. What are some of the examples of some of the worst things that you've seen?
Something worse. Something it's nice to make people aware of, because a lot of people cross their hands over. Now, they don't lose control of the car. But seem to remember
on the steering wheel. Right, okay.
But one of the developments in the cars for safety is the airbag. So if you're going around the roundabout and somebody hits you, the airbag deploys, you then punch yourself in the face at 200 miles an hour. And then people, perhaps I don't want to cross my hands over anymore, because... So little things like that you can just point out.
Yeah, I suppose because that position is going to be like you're kind of covering your own face, isn't it, at 200 miles an hour?
So you go to work with a nice black eye and just punch yourself, but you know you could also have a broken wrist at the same time.
I think we could all do with being aware of how to save money on petrol, and I know some people ride the clutch, don't they, and some people sort of, you know, change gears.
We usually find the older the driver, the more benefit we get, because they've taught a style for the type of car they learned in. But over the last 2-3 decades, the Boffins have been busy, they've developed our cars, certain processes we can change, and people tend to be driving how they were taught because they think that's correct.
They're just entrenched in that behaviour because that's how they were taught.
They're taught to go through all the gears. Now we take out a few of the gear changes, and gear changing actually is quite a big fuel user. So the fewer gear changes you can make, the better it is. We've got much better braking systems on our car now than we had 20-30 years ago. So we can use the brakes to slow down, then select the gear you need.
So almost, in fact, it's not just awareness; it's retraining them, isn't it, to drive in a different way?
Yeah. You know,
How receptive are older people to that?
Someone. Yeah. You try and work. You explain why the changes are. You don't say, "No, do it like this," because the way you're doing it's wrong. Well, they're not going to work with you.
Exactly.
You explain, "Well, we do it now because the car's been developed." You know, you think back to your first car. What were the brakes like? That's what you was taught to go through all the gears. Now we've got much better braking systems. Slow down the brakes. Go to the gear you need.
I remember my granddad, God love him, gone to God now, but he had a big old Austin Cambridge, and that was the first car I ever sat in the driver's seat of when I was a child. And I just never thought I would ever be able to drive anything like that, because they were big, solid cars in those days, weren't they?
Yeah.
And I was impressed that he drove it.
Yeah. No power steering.
No power steering. Parking. How did we ever park these cars? I bet you see some sort of. I mean, talking about parking. There's that whole debate going on about men and women and how they park and parallel parking and that kind of thing. Do you give hints and tips on that as well, or?
Yeah, again, for efficiency and safety. Lots of companies now, if you work for like Norwich Union or Aviva it's called now, British Gas, National Grid, all their staff car parks are reversing only.
Oh, really?
Yeah. 54% of our insurance claims are done manoeuvring in car parks.
54%? Wow.
Costing UK business about 400 million a year in repair to the vehicles, hire another one, time that vehicle's off the road.
54% in car parks? That's a huge statistic.
Car parks, slow movers, you know. So a lot of these companies now getting all the staff to reverse in. Means when they drive off with a cold engine, they're not putting so much wear and tear on the engine. And when pedestrians get hit by vehicles, it's when they're reversing. So if you're driving out and somebody walks in front of you, you see them. If you're reversing out with a van, no windows in the back, first thing you might hear is the bang. So there's lots and lots of benefits just by purely reversing into space when you get there.
How do you feel about reversing cameras in cars?
They can be useful, yeah. It just gives you another angle.
Another tool to use to try and improve. So are you busy at the moment?
Quite busy, yeah. Mixture of everything, bit of learners, company car drivers, van drivers, lorry, the whole thing is sort of in the mix.
And you mentioned before the job that you'd had before this. I mean, is this something you've always wanted to do? When you were a little boy in a Suffolk school, what were your dreams?
I can't remember now. Seems a long time ago. Yeah. Well,
Where did you go to school?
In Debenham.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, out in the sticks.
Yeah. And you live now in Stowmarket?
Stowmarket, yeah.
Right, okay. But so, when you left school, what was your first job?
First job was actually working in an animal feed mill, making pig feed.
Oh, right.
And then moved on to deliveries, so I got on the lorries, done me HGV licence as it was at the time, changed a few companies, more road haulage, and did that for 12 years. But then I thought, do I want to do this till I retire? So I looked at taking more training and progressing myself.
But you've always enjoyed driving yourself anyway, so made a career out of it.
A career, it's been on the road, yeah.
So how many people have passed the test with you then?
I wouldn't like to think. 15 years, I don't know. I haven't got a clue.
And how much are driving lessons with the Adrian Baldry School of Driving?
At the moment, 23.
Right.
Yeah, it's quite competitive out there.
Is it? Yes.
Yeah, there's lots of instructors out there at the moment. So, trying to...
Yeah, I think a lot of people have tried, they get made redundant or they do things, and that's one of the avenues that they go down, isn't it, that they can train to be one. Yeah,
unfortunately, you see lots of adverts in the paper offering, mega bucks. Obviously, these companies don't really focus on learners. These companies train people to be instructors. That is their business. So, they might say you're franchised at the end of it when you pass. Can't guarantee the work's going to be there. And obviously you've spent several £1,000s on all the training.
And presumably the car itself with the dual controls, they're not cheap either, are they?
Dual controls actually isn't that expensive if you buy it from the company and you get a very nice fitter to do it. You can probably fit a dual control for about £350. So it's not huge money just for that. But obviously some of these people, like some of the bigger companies, you're looking at perhaps £200-300 a week franchise fee. Well, that's perhaps three plus days you work in just to pay the company back for the franchise. Yeah,
that's a really big hit, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd have to be doing a 6-day week to you know, even put bread on the table, really, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And that's been that for many years. When I qualified with one of the major schools, you know, I didn't actually work there and work. I set up on my own, stayed in my old job until the phone started to ring. Not many people can do that, unfortunately. I was in a job where I had a good relationship with the boss, and we needed each other for a little while. And over about 18 months, I suppose, I then sort of drifted away because I'd filled my order book.
I would imagine you get quite a lot of your clients from previous happy clients, people who've seen the benefit of what you do. That's one of the hardest ways to get business, and you know, by referral, word of mouth.
You can't rely on it. You can't rely on it. If you ride on that on its own, you'd struggle. But again, advertising, as you probably know, it's changed. When I first started, we just adverts in Yellow Pages, Company Directory. That doesn't work anymore. It's all on social media.
Are you active on social media?
I try to be honest. I could be better. I could probably use it more effectively.
Yes, because there's just so many choices of social media as well, isn't it? I mean, and what works for one business might not be for another. You know, Facebook and Twitter, they're two very different mediums for different audiences as well.
Different age groups.
Yes, that's right. So it's interesting to see what works for a business in the social media arena.
And also keeping your private life social media away from your business social media. Because it needs to be different.
But don't you think generally anyway, I mean, the way that we do things now is so different. The way we buy, the way we sell, the way we communicate, everything's changed so radically in the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah,
and
it's a big change.
And for me, the biggest change I've seen, aside from the technological advances, is it's now about sharing information, whereas it used to be about protecting your information and you'd keep that secret.
Yeah.
But now it's a sort of, no, have this, and you know, have you seen that?
Share the information you've got.
Yeah.
Make it, show people that you are expert in your field.
Yeah. So on your website, are there any sort of like simulated driving things that you can do? Have you thought about that or not?
I've got the videos because obviously now the latest change in the driving test is the independent driving.
Right.
Where for 10 minutes you'll just get given a destination to follow. And there's an example of that on my website. So
well, one of the things I want to talk to you about as well is I know that you're running, is it a skid pan course?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, we've got a nice wide bit of ground, so nothing to hit. We've got two old cars retrieved from the scrapyard. One's front wheel drive, one's rear wheel drive. Got a nice area covered in used cooking oil.
Where did you get the cooking oil from?
From the canteen around the corner.
Right, okay.
And so people can go out and feel that these effects have been on ice. They go out and they put themselves into the skid, usually by having too much power, too aggressive with the steering, so they start to get the skid, and then we teach them how to control it or get out of it again. So
there's a driver, there's a you in the car with them?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're just vocally sort of saying...
Well, we give them a demonstration first.
Right.
Show them techniques.
Yeah.
And we've got front wheel drive and rear wheel drive, so you can see the differences.
Okay.
Because the cars behave very, very differently, and different techniques to get out of the skid once you've got into it.
That sounds really exciting, actually. When's this being held?
My next day is 20th of October.
20th of October. Yeah. And are there places still left available?
There are some places still left, yeah.
Right.
So on interest, obviously we can make more dates available.
Okay, all right. And how many people do you have on that course?
Well, just 10 people.
Right.
So people can get the most out of it. There's no point in having too many because you wouldn't get a very big turn.
And whereabouts in Suffolk are you holding it?
That's near Bury St Edmunds.
Near Bury, okay. And if anybody did want to go on it, how would they contact you?
If you got me to note, I can put them in touch.
Right, so what's the URL for your website?
Is Adrian Baldry School of Motoring.
Adrian Baldry School of Motoring.
Yeah, if you Google that, it should find me.
.co.uk.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And you are on Twitter.
At AD Baldry.
At AD Baldry.
Yeah.
Okay. And have you embraced Facebook as well?
A little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
You have a business page on there. I think if we Google Adrian Baldry School of Motoring, you'll find out a way. Sorry, I'm leaning down to calm my dog down because he's panting. You will find Adrian and be able to contact him to maybe get a secure place either on the course on the 20th of October. How much is that, Adrian?
£60.
£60, okay. Or at least be kept informed of any upcoming dates that might be closer to home. Is there another venue closer to Felixstowe that you used for these?
For the skid pan, unfortunately not. They're not that easy to come by. A nice big open piece of ground which people lips covered in cooking oil. They're few and far between, so we're quite lucky that Bury is not that far away.
Okay, so if you're watching this video and you have a suitable piece of land near Felixstowe that Adrian might be able to use for his skid pan, how would you transport the cooking oil though? You need somebody locally to do this with a whole pile of used cooking oil, don't you? Well, Adrian, it's been a real pleasure talking to you this morning. Thank you for putting up with Presto here, because he has been fairly well behaved, I think. And I wish you good luck with your training and keeping the people of Suffolk fuel efficient, safe and compliant.
Yes,
thanks very much, Adrian.
Thank you. Thanks, Sue.